Casey Joyner, ESPN.com NFL insider, affectionately known as the football scientist. He joins us now on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. A little football hiatus, but welcome back, my friend.
Great to be here.
We know that the third preseason game a lot of times is the big one for many of these teams, but the Eagles have been making some news leading into this. And before we get into some of the nuts and bolts here, I want to get your take on how Ronald Darby fits into this Eagles defense. Did you like the trade of Jordan Matthews for Darby for Howie Roseman there?
Yeah, if you're not going to keep Matthews long-term, and frankly, Matthews is a good slot receiver, but that's a skill set you can replace. Darby was what I call a red-rated cornerback. When I looked at his numbers from last year, I rank players by red, yellow, and green, with red being, if you're a defender, a really good metric, a really good ranking. So he's one of an upper-tier guys at cornerback, and you can play call receivers open, but you just can't replace talent on defense, and Philadelphia needed some secondary talent in a big way. So I only like the trade. I love the trade.
So you say you don't like the trade. You love the trade. How does he really transform what this defense was and turn it into something different? Because they have been very average. I don't know what you had guys like Nolan Carroll rated, in terms of corner, but this seems like a big upgrade, and it allows Jim Schwartz now to do things that he has not been able to do.
Yeah, because when you've got so many holes in the secondary, when you're as bad as Philadelphia was last year in vertical passing, you have to do, if your number one thing as a defensive coordinator is, okay, we can't give up the big play. You always want to do that anyway, calling to not allow the big play. So at this point, now Philadelphia can now say, at least on one side of the field, we've got a guy who we know we can trust. We don't have to, we don't have to worry so much about coverage there. We can rotate coverage this way. We can do other things. It just opens up a lot more things, because if you've got people in the secondary who can, I'm gonna call them a shutdown corner, but if you've got reliable corners, really reliable corners, if you've got somebody back there like that, it just changes the whole dynamic. So it's a huge plus.
Yeah, and one thing that it seemed like last year that Jim Schwartz he was reluctant to blitz a lot because he didn't trust the guys back there. This might be able to change that philosophy.
Yeah, and I think he wants to. I know he's not going to be. It's not going to be Dr. Blitz like we got Michigan coaches from Michigan. He's not going to be one of those guys. But I think Schwartz likes to blitz. I think he wants to do it more often. But again, if you've got as many weaknesses as they had last year, your first thing is you have to make sure that your secondary is defended from that. You can't put them into situations because you can't trust them. I think that might be the biggest thing, is he's a cornerback you can trust. He's going to get beaten on occasion, but he's a cornerback you can largely trust. And if you're a defensive coordinator, you might get an extra 10 minutes of sleep at night having him back there.
Talking with Casey Joyner here, ESPN.com NFL insider. Obviously, Darby is here, which means Matthews is not. Nelson Agholor had his struggles. Do you think, though, maybe sliding down to the slot's a better fit for him?
It could be. I talked to a guy a couple weeks ago about the Agholor situation, and he said that Agholor was looking great in camp because the Eagles' cornerbacks are so bad they make anybody look good. So, which I thought, well, that makes sense. It could be. But if Agholor could even, again, you can play call people open, and a lot of what the Eagles do out of the slot is you're working against air. You're finding a dead spot in the zone. So Agholor doesn't have to be a guy who's going to get beat matchups. He just has to be somebody. If we tell you to run, we tell you to run a center route, we tell you to run a stop route, we tell you to run a hook, and just, and you're going to be the underneath guy, and somebody else is going to tear the top off the defense, and that's what you do. Can he do that? I think he can do it better than he did it last year, and if he could just be okay in that situation, okay, well, then you can get solid production, because Matthews did not have great production last year. His numbers did drop off in a number of places, so it's one of those situations where if Agholor steps up and compared to where Matthews was last year, you don't like to see that level of production, but you can live with it.
Hey, KC, how about a guy that Mike and I have been talking about over the last 48 hours a lot, and that's LeGarrette Blount. How do you think LeGarrette Blount fits into Doug Peterson's offense?
LeGarrette Blount is a rare back in that I've got a metric called good blocking yards per attempt. It measures how productive a running back is whenever he gets good blocking. It's really important because running backs are 4 to 5 times more productive when they get good blocking than when they get bad blocking. Power backs they'll usually be consistent in good blocking yards per attempt. They don't normally have breakaway speed. Blount on a couple of occasions in his career has ended the season with a double-digit total in good blocking yards per attempt, which is usually going to be in the top 5 in the league in that if that's the case. So he's a guy who can give you that power back ability. He can be your closer, he can be your goal line back, he can do those things, but he also has the ability to break long gainers that you normally don't see in a back his size. So it's a great 1-2 punch for them.
Spending a few minutes with Casey Joyner here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN, that good blocking yards per attempt. I'm trying to think of a fun acronym for you, GBYA, but we'll move on from that. That'll lead me right to the Eagles' offensive line. You wrote about this at ESPN.com. You have Philadelphia ranking 6th in your most recent updated projected O-line rankings for the 2017 season. And to some people, they'd say, wow, 6? What led you to put the Eagles at that rank?
I was surprised that they rated that high as well, but what we did is my editor asked me to put together a list of rankings, not to just say where Philadelphia or every team was last year, but where they probably going to be this year. So I graded teams on pass blocking and run blocking, but I also added in a stability consistency metric saying how consistent were you in your metrics and how stable is your personnel, because NFL teams are returning about 80% of their offensive linemen from last year, so the NFL teams really like to see a lot of stability there. So I graded them in that, and I also added a schedule element to say how favorable is your schedule from a blocking perspective. Philadelphia got a B+ in pass blocking. They get an A- in run blocking. You wouldn't think they'd be that good, but they ranked 3rd last year in good blocking rate, how often they were giving their ball carriers good blocking. So they did a very good job there. And not only that, hey, they didn't have Lane Johnson you only have him for 6 games last year. So he returns, and he didn't qualify, by the way, as a starter because the way I set my system up, he would have qualified as a backup because he only played 6 games. So he didn't even give them anything in the stability consistency metric. So you could argue that the Eagles should have rated higher. The problem for them, though, is they get a D- in schedule ranking, so it's one of those situations where they have a really good line, but they're going to be tested a lot this year.
You still have Dallas as the top offensive line in the NFC East?
I don't. Believe it or not, Dallas, because of the in the initial rankings that didn't account for schedule, they're ranked 10th. They've dropped down to 13th, and that may sound crazy, but consider this. We know they're great run blocking. Their pass blocking was a B for a number of reasons. They ranked 25th last year in pressure rate allowed. In other words, how many times the quarterback's dropping back and you're allowing defensive pressure? 25th in the league. And they also rated 25th in how many times the quarterback got hit in the drop back. So their pass blocking wasn't nearly as good. They had to replace 2 starters, so the stability consistency was a C-, and their schedule grade was a D- because they got just as tough a schedule as Philadelphia. So when I look at all that, I still think they're going to be a really good line, but they're going to have to take some time to gel this year, and then that time it takes to gel with the schedule that they have, I think they might have some down games.
Hey, what does that Dallas line, as you said, you have graded lower, do, not to mention losing Elliott? What do you think that does for Prescott this year?
I think it's going to put a lot of pressure on him. I do fantasy stuff for ESPN, and I've got him listed as one of my bust players in a fantasy perspective because I just think he's going to be the line situation is going to test them. They're going to do okay run blocking, but the problem for them is that they also have a situation schedule-wise where they could get into a number of shootouts, and they may have to ask Prescott to pass in situations where he's not got a lead. He's not leading on the running game. He can't do that quite as much. So he may have to be in situations where he's asked to win more. So I wouldn't go so far as to call it a sophomore slump because I think he played so well last year. The Cowboys still have enough talent that I don't think he's going to have a bad season. But I wouldn't be surprised to see him struggle in a few games.
Talked about the Eagles offensive line, the Dallas offensive line. If we have KC Joyner on, we should talk about our neighbors to the north. That would be the New York Giants. KC, is their line bad enough that it could jeopardize a playoff spot for the G-men?
Yeah, their line is not terribly consistent. Part of their problem is the consistency issue. They've got some games you look at their offensive line, you'll see them play really well, and then other times you'll see them not do so well. That's why they've got a C+ in stability consistency. Their run blocking was a D+. You wonder how much of that though is Perkins. Is he just because he's playing so mediocre this preseason, they're talking about putting Orleans Darkwind in his place in the starting lineup. So you wonder if some of it might be that. But they do well in pass blocking. They got a B+ in pass blocking. And I think they're probably going to say, if we can't run block well, all we can do is pass. We'll have Eli pass a lot, but then it's good Eli, bad Eli. What are you going to get? So I have a feeling that New York's going to have to lean on their passing game more than their running game this year.
Should be a lot of interesting storylines with offensive lines. You had Dallas at 13. You just talked about the Giants. Philadelphia at 6. They're not the top in the league, though. You like the Washington O-line.
Yeah, top of the division would be Washington. They're 5th. They rank just ahead. They rated, before I added in schedule, I had Philadelphia 5 and Washington, I believe, was 6. So the schedules are similar. Washington has a slight edge there, and plus they have the edge in stability consistency, too. They got a B+. Again, if you ran the numbers a different way and counted Lane Johnson as, if you counted him as a returning starter, Philadelphia would probably rank ahead. So
right.
But
so that Lane Johnson makes a big difference for Philadelphia.
Yeah. Yeah, Lane Johnson makes a big difference. You add him in there, I think Philadelphia's top 5, maybe 4. But listing him as a backup, they ended up being 6. But yeah, Washington ranks 5th. Their pass blocking's an A, so it's a huge plus for them.
And who was the worst offensive line in football?
Wasn't even close. No matter how I ran it, the Seattle Seahawks were the worst. They were the only team, and on the pass blocking, run blocking, only one team got an F grade in any of those categories. It was Seattle had an F in pass blocking. They're abysmal. That they win the way they do with that kind of line is just incredible. They try and coach them up, and it just doesn't work.
They did trade for Matt Tobin yesterday, so they got that going for them, which is nice, right? Casey Joyner's with us.
First,
Yeah. So I'm interested to get your take on Carson Wentz now in year number 2, because we talked about Prescott, and there's a lot of conversation in this area. They're both second-year guys. They're both kind of in interesting situations here. I feel like the Eagles going out, getting Jeffrey, Smith, Blount. They have the offensive line that you like and talked about right there. I think there's a lot of pressure, and should be a lot of pressure, on Carson Wentz. The Eagles basically told him, hey, buddy, last year we didn't give you anything, and you were good, not great. This year, we went out and got you some stuff. You need to show us that you're the guy.
Yeah, they're going to want to get him to do a lot better in vertical passing because, in fact, that's the thing. He rated poorly in short passing. He only had 5.5 yards per attempt. That was the bottom 10 in the league category, or number in that category, and 9.4 yards per vertical attempt. You want to be 11 or 12 in that category. So they said, yeah, we're going to give you short vertical receivers. The thing is they gave him Jeffrey, who's going to be an all-around receiver. I still think that the underrated addition they had is Smith, because Smith, 2 years ago, Smith was second in the league of vertical yards per attempt. Now, he did terrible last year. He was one of the worst in the league, but he's not that far removed from being a top-notch receiver. So even if he doesn't get back to that level, he just gets close to it, you're going to expect that number should go up. So, yeah, the expectations have moved up because now they do have downfield targets. And if a 9.4 yards per attempt on vertical passes from Wentz, that won't be acceptable this year.
How do you see Alshon Jeffrey fitting in with Carson Wentz? Do you like that combination? I know Jay Cutler came in here the other day and said, look, you got a good one with Alshon Jeffrey. Now, Jay Cutler's got a pretty big arm.
Yeah. Jeffrey last year, he had struggled in past years or been inconsistent in past years, depending on the type of competition you gave him. If you gave him tough competition, he might not do so well. Last year, he had above average or better rankings against every level of competition, however you wanted to parse it, he was that good. And he also did well. He had 11.2 yards on vertical passes, so that's good. He also did 16 yards per attempt on stretch vertical passes. That's when you're throwing 20 more yards downfield, goes, corners, things of that nature. I don't think they're going to lean on him for that, but it shows that if you're a defense and let's say Smith starts to play well in that area, if you start paying too much attention to him, Jeffrey can beat you too.
Spending some time with Casey Joyner, football scientist, ESPN analyst. I want to go back to the Elliott potentially being out for 6 games, Casey. What in your mind does that do to Dallas and their offense this season?
It's going to hurt them, but Elliott the thing about Elliott. He's like a lot of the great backs, in that his best ability isn't just tearing the top off of defense, because he's good at that. But his best ability is that when you give him the ball on his 300th carry, he can be as productive as he was on his first carry. He doesn't see a drop off in production. That's where his strength is. So if you're only talking about replacing him for 6 games. Okay, so now you got to ask McFadden to go for 6 games, and he's proven that he can. I don't think he'd keep up for a whole season, but can he keep it up for 6 games? Sure, he can do that. And plus, he's not the only back that they can lean on. So I think that they're going to lose something out of it, but I think McFadden's going to be a good replacement for them. And as long as Elliott stays in shape, if he's out for 6, and maybe he's only out for 4, who knows what's going to happen, but if he's out for 6, if he stays in shape and comes back at that level, then it could be great for Dallas, because if McFadden fills in it well, then now you've got Elliott as a shock troop essentially going for the rest of the season. How
about the Dallas defense, Casey? Will there be a drop-off from them?
I think they're going to be asked to do a whole lot more, because the schedule says that they're probably going to get in a lot more shootouts this year. They didn't rank well in interceptions. They weren't a ball-hawking defense, and I don't think they're going to be ball-hawking defense this year. They did rush the passer fairly well, but I've got a metric called shootout points, which measures how likely you are to get into shootouts, and they're near the bottom of the league. They're going to get in a lot of shootouts.
And again, that goes back to Prescott. I find him to be one of the more intriguing stories this year.
Yeah, he is, because it's you didn't see what he was going to be in college. I cover college football too, and he's good in college. But did anybody see that this was going to be what he was going to be in year 1? No. But again, is it Did the system make him last year? I don't mean to call him a system quarterback, but if you've got a lot of things going your way and you can lean on the ground game and you only have to ask the quarterback to do so much, that's one thing. But he's at the place where Russell Wilson was early in his career, where at first you were like, okay, is Wilson an assistant quarterback, or can he do it? Can he just carry it without having when things aren't going his way? Well, Wilson can do it now. He's shown, hey, if you need me to throw the ball, I can do it. Prescott's not there yet, so he's at the point where you're still wondering how much of the system is benefiting him and how much is him.
All right, you go into the NFC East. A lot of talk about Dallas, always. New York, playoff team last year, have stars. You got Philadelphia, who added a lot. You got Kirk Cousins in Washington. No one's talking a lot about them. Should they be?
They should be. Cousins last year, going into last year, everybody was asking, okay, or you looked at Cousins' numbers, you'd say his numbers were terrible on vertical passes. It doesn't look like he can do very well in that category, and boy, if he can't hit vertical passes, that's why Washington's not going to sign him to a long-term extension. Last year, he had elite numbers. He had upper-tier, top 3 in the league numbers on just about any kind of measurement you want to do for vertical and stretch vertical passes. He's just that good. The problem for him is Deshaun Jackson is now in Tampa Bay. And Deshaun Jackson was in the top 3 in the league in vertical and stretch vertical, in most of the vertical and stretch vertical categories as well. So how much of it went from Deshaun Jackson, how much of it was due to him? Okay, I think some of it's they're going to see some of a drop off there. And yeah, they bring in Pryor, but Pryor, his numbers, we talked about 9.4 yards per attempt for Wentz last year on vertical passes. Sherrell Pryor had 9.6 yards per vertical pass attempt. He's not doing that well either. So if he takes a step back from Jackson, I think their vertical game takes a step back. And if Washington's vertical game starts to take a step back from great last year to, let's say, just very good this year, or maybe even good, if that's the case, that's a big drop-off.
Yeah, and you mentioned their offensive line you like, but do you like their run game?
Not as much as I do their passing game. Their run blocking rated a C. They're not that good at the running game. They almost have them, or C+. They had a run blocking rated C+. So no, not nearly as much. They're solid, but they're not great. But they have to pass block, and that's the thing. If you can give Kirk Cousins A-rated pass blocking again this year, okay, maybe that's a big part of why. In fact, I'm sure it's a big part of why he had a lot of good vertical production last year. So maybe that'll close some of the gap for what Pryor had last year. And again, playing with a better team will help him too. But if he doesn't, and my concern is that I don't know that he and Pryor are going to reach the elite levels. I actually think Crowder's going to be the best receiver on that team.
Casey Joyner is with us. All right, we're getting close to this third preseason game. So football shuts down after the third week of the preseason. We take a little hiatus before September 8th starts the season that Thursday night here. But give us a couple of guys you think are primed to have some big years this year. Quarterbacks, some skilled guys that you like.
I'm really high on Cam Newton and Jameis Winston both. I've written some articles in the ESPN fantasy section about it, but from an NFL perspective, everything is setting up for them to play very well. Cam Newton did well in 2015 in the second half of the season because he had a really favorable schedule. He's got a favorable schedule almost the entire season. Winston, he added Deshaun Jackson. He added O.J. Howard. O.J. Howard was second among Power 5 tight ends last year in vertical reception percentage. So you've got a high percentage impact receiver there, too. So I think that's going to upgrade their passing game a lot. I really like Brandon Cooks in New England. They brought him in there to take over the Randy Moss role. And last year, Tom Brady threw 56 vertical passes to Julian Edelman, and that went about as well as you'd expect. Despite that, Brady still ranks third in vertical yards per attempt. Cooks will increase that, and Brady will probably take the lead in that category. So I like all those guys. Love Dalvin Cook too, by the way. They trust him in pass blocking, and I think he could be a bell cow back in Minnesota.
Very interesting. We'll see how that all plays out in Minnesota. The post-Adrian Peterson days. I know Casey Joyner, of course, who also covers the WWE on ESPN. You had to watch SummerSlam the other night, and you wrote an interesting article about the parallels between NFL and WWE. Some guys possibly having that in their future.
Yeah, we actually looked at we saw D'Angelo Williams make his debut and retirement match all at the same time. He had a great match, and we started asking ourselves, what guys could actually become, not like, okay, this is who we would like to, but who do we think could actually become a WWE superstar? And I happen to have a contact with Gerald Briscoe, WWE, the other famous Briscoe brothers.
Right.
We traded messages and things, and we sent we called some names out and sent them to him and asked him what he thought, and he actually agreed that a lot of these guys could become stars. We listed Rob Gronkowski for obvious reasons. Pac-Man Jones has had he did some stuff in TNA a couple years ago, so he's there. We found a guy named Jace Billingsley as a Lions wide receiver. He has the state record for wrestling wins for about a high school wrestler. So he's a guy who has that kind of background. And actually, Jerry told me about a guy named Brock Hecking, who's a free agent linebacker for the Chargers. He said he's a crazy guy with a big personality. The guy looks just like Brian Bosworth, and as soon as they can clear him from his Chargers contract because he got cut due to injury, he can actually they'll sign him and be in developmental, and you might see him become a big star because the guy, if you look at him, he looks like Brian Bosworth in the ring.
And we know Brock Lesnar, he tried out for the Vikings a couple of years, about 15 years back. I mean, he didn't make it, but so we see a lot of crossover. I know Baron Corbin is a guy who was with the Cardinals, correct?
Yeah, he was. Yep, we've got. We actually think Ben Boulware. If people saw the Vine video when he played Syracuse, he actually tackled a guy with what looked like a German suplex, and so Ben Boulware, if it doesn't turn out for the Panthers, he's probably gonna make the Panthers. But that's the thing. If they only have a couple 3 years there and they want to go down to the WWE, some of these guys like Kasim Edebali, a Broncos linebacker, he's actually been to the Performance Center in Winter Park. He's actually spent a couple days down there doing some training.
Hey, I think that Braun Strowman could play D tackle for some teams.
Yes, the monster among men absolutely could.
Unbelievable. All right, Casey's back for football season. We'll be talking to him throughout the season, getting you ready for all the games, breaking them down. And don't forget, you can check Casey out, of course, on Twitter at KC Joyner TFS, and check him out at WWE on ESPN as well. His piece on the possible future SummerSlam stars, maybe a guy like Rob Gronkowski, who was in what event was that he was part of the Royal Rumble.
He was part of WrestleMania. He
WrestleMania.
He got on the ring and did a shoulder tackle to help Mojo Rawley win the Battle Royal.
There you go. All right, Casey. Well, football season's back. We look forward to talking to you, my friend.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks.